Hello all! Today I'll be working on a scarf with a rainbow warp made with hypoallergenic yarn that was donated to me from a follower's mother's stash, and talking about autism acceptance, and not just autism, but the incredibly high comorbid rates of hypermobile Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, which I have. It's going to get a little dark in spots because my background with my hypermobile Ehlers Danlos Syndrome is not the best. But I'm going to give a lot of content warnings before that, and yeah, we'll get through. But this is important information that I think a lot of my followers should have. So I hope you enjoy. My name is Took. I'm a disabled genderqueer weaver who's had life take odd turns, but who knows that even tattered and worn yarn still has value, and that tired joints and health flares don't have to stop the journey. I weave exclusively with secondhand fibers, aid with adaptive warping, HR and OSHA cats, and a wonderful found family. Welcome to Hawksong Weaving, where all our paths are a little bit warped. So, a bit of an explanation on why I've developed this adaptive warping method. As I stated before, I have hypermobile Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, which has cascaded into postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome and mast cell activation syndrome, but I'll get into those later. So for time's sake, know that I have joints that don't work, and if I shift positions too quickly, I get pre-syncope or pre-fainting symptoms. All of this comes with chronic pain, so for a lot of reasons, a traditional warping board doesn't work for me, along with being really expensive and taking up a lot of space in my small studio. So I use an accordion coat rack as my warping board. It's nice and neat, it contracts into a smaller space, and I can adjust it as I need to. And I don't need to be up and down and all around and having tachycardia, a racing heart, that stresses out my medical alert cat Penelope. So a heads up that I'm going to be quoting directly from the Ehlers Danlos Society website. So for a lot of that, and I will link them down below. So a lot of this information is just going to be repeated. I'm not going to bother paraphrasing because it is snowing in April and I have brain fog while I'm getting this editing done. So doing my best. So what is Ehlers Danlos Syndrome? The Ehlers Danlos syndromes are a group of 3 heritable, so genetic, connective tissue disorders. The conditions are caused by genetic changes that affect connective tissue. Each type of EDS has its own set features with distinct diagnostic criteria. Some features are seen across all types of EDS, including joint hypermobility, skin hypertensibility, and tissue fragility. Hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome is the most common on the range of Ehlers Danlos syndrome spectrums. Right now, hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome does not have any known associated genes or proteins, and the inheritance pattern is autosomal dominant. So basically, 1 in 3,000 to 5,000 people have hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome. And that's a little terrifying because it's really, really underdiagnosed. The symbol of the Ehlers Danlos Syndrome Society is a zebra because doctors are taught if you hear footbeats or hoofbeats, think of a horse, not a zebra. And we are zebras, and we are much more common than most medical professionals would like to believe. Why I'm making this video in Autism Acceptance Month is that research continues to show that people with joint hypermobility, Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, and hypermobility spectrum disorders are more likely to be autistic than would be expected by chance, and this is a direct quote. A 2025 systematic review and meta-analysis by Carolina Beza Velasco, if I mispronounced that, I apologize, et al., found that approximately 31% of autistic individuals exhibit joint hypermobility, and about 39% of people with EDS or HSD meet diagnostic criteria for autism. These findings add to earlier research by Brighton and Sussex Medical School led by Dr. Jessica Eccles, which found that over 50% of people with a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, or Tourette syndrome showed elevated levels of joint hypermobility compared to just 20% of the general population. The study also highlighted significantly higher levels of chronic pain and dysautonomia amongst neurodivergent participants, linked to the number of hypermobile joints. Medical professionals should be aware of these links. It is important because autistic individuals may present with symptoms that could be explained by co-occurring hypermobility conditions like EDS or HSD and vice versa. So why am I talking about this in a weaving video? Well, this is me being facetious, but still fairly accurate. I'm sure a neurotypical fiber artist exists. I just don't think I've met one. So if you're on my channel, there's a strong chance that you are neurodivergent, and if there's a strong chance that you're neurodivergent, there's a strong chance that you have hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome or some form of hypermobility or Ehlers Danlos syndrome, etc. And if you don't, because it's genetic, it's likely that a family member does. So I'm trying to share these signs that I had throughout my life that I had hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome. And this is a brief bit of darkness that I'm going to allude to, but not go into specifics. I've had doctors look me in the eyes, which was not pleasant because autistic. I've had doctors look me in the eyes and tell me that I am a textbook case for medically neglected hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome. I'm not going to go into a lot of that in this video, but I am going to go over the signs that were very, very obvious in hindsight, because hindsight is 2020, and talk about those a bit, because if I have this, probably some of you do too, and if you don't, your family members do. And it's like that Daria quote of, I have to. If I don't, then all the damage I've gotten will have just been bad damage. It won't have made any difference in the world, and it's just dumb. So here we go. Some of the signs that I had hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome throughout my entire life, because, that's how it works. I had hypermobile joints. I didn't have any party tricks that I would show for folks, but I would constantly be sublexing and or dislocating my shoulders very subtly as a stimming method, because I was not allowed to stim visibly. I had consistent finger, wrist, and ankle sprains throughout childhood, to the point that one of my doctors in my childhood told me that if I sprained my left ankle again, they were going to have to surgically shorten the tendon. I was constantly having to readjust my joints and continually shifting my body to alleviate pain. This was interpreted as fidgeting and boredom. I had incredibly poor proprioception and balance. I was tripping and injuring myself a lot because of the hypermobility. My limbs were constantly at different lengths. I had consistent hairline fractures in my fingers and toes. I would continually have peripheral neuropathy, or numbness and loss of feeling in my feet and lower legs. I had a security stuffy throughout most of my childhood that was tucked underneath my arms to support my shoulder joints. I would have tendinitis, sharp stabbing pains in the tendons, usually in my ankles after I sprained them multiple times. Dermatography, skin writing, where you're able to write on your skin and it stays there for 15 plus minutes. Very elastic, soft skin, large sunken eyes with pronounced under eye bags, elongated or disproportionate limbs in comparison to the length of the body, more mobile teeth / loose teeth, receding gum line even when healthy, crowded teeth, and a high palate. I'm forgetting the name, the folks who do the braces, they loved me because my teeth kept moving really, really quickly. I would have chronic, intense nausea and vomiting, especially in the mornings, chronic acid reflux, and I slept propped up with pillows so that I would not sprain, sublex, or vomit in my sleep. Intense insomnia due to pain, crying to sleep due to quote-unquote growing pains. If your child is crying themselves to sleep because of growing pains, please bring them to a doctor. Growing pains are not supposed to hurt that much, and also there's more and more evidence coming up that growing pains aren't actually a thing. Growing should not hurt, and if it is hurting, then please go see a doctor. Allergic reactions to my own tears. Tears aren't supposed to burn. They are not supposed to burn your face. That's not something that your own tears and fluids are supposed to do. Early onset varicose veins, bulging veins, herniated veins and tendons. I had several, they're called Bible cysts. I forget exactly what they're called, but basically it's a herniated tendon in your hand that had to be drained a couple times. And early onset arthritis, first noted in my toes when I was 21 years old, first noted in my knees when I was 27 years old. This is no joke. This drastically affected my quality of life, and it can be prevented. I've known people who clearly have hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome, but because their parents got them in for physical therapy at a much younger age and actually started doing preventative maintenance and interventions, they're not in chronic pain and they're going to be living the rest of their life relatively happy and safe. Having that early intervention, especially if your child is also neurodivergent or neurodivergent and autistic specifically, from my personal experience, is critical, because if there are compounding complex traumas added to that, that is a surefire recipe for mast cell activation syndrome. And I'm being facetious with surefire, but you get the point. Mast cell activation syndrome is what happens when the mast cells, which are what's again made from collagen, which makes sense because Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a collagen disorder. What happens when the mast cells overproduce histamine or produce too much histamine in general, and that causes allergic reactions to a lot of things. And there were a lot of signs of that for me growing up as well. I would have chronic respiratory illnesses, asthma, pneumonia. It was eased when I was no longer in an environment with specific pollens, but never fully went away. I was experienced at dealing with asthma to the point that when people were getting COVID and complaining about the chest contractions and spasms and how it induced coughing, I was genuinely confused, because I thought we all learned at a young age how to take short, shallow breaths so that you wouldn't induce that sort of spasming. Stop trying to breathe deeply. It doesn't work. But apparently that's not common knowledge. Osteoporosis, I was breaking bones when spraining ankles, numerous fingers, toes, etc. Rapid metabolism for alcohol-based medication, or medication that had that sort of influx in it. I would have a very rapid, strong effect and then burn through it very, very quickly. To the point that as a child, I was getting essentially a little bit tipsy on pain medication, but it wasn't being noticed because I had a cold. Low spice tolerance. I've got an increased tolerance now that I'm on antihistamines, but with a stinging sensation rather than a burning sensation for spice. Stinging sensations for foods such as pickles, kimchi, kombucha, alcohol, citrus, tomatoes. I genuinely thought that everyone liked ketchup because it was a very mild hot sauce. Apparently not. Utilitarian philosophy applied to food decisions, i.e., this tastes good but hurts too badly, so I won't eat it, but this tastes good and doesn't hurt, so I'll eat it. Or this tastes good and I'm in pain after, but it doesn't hurt too badly, so I was genuinely shocked that people weren't in pain after eating. Eating is painful and risky, but we have to do it to survive. I thought this was something we were all just enduring. I was also genuinely shocked that solid bowel movements existed. I would also have consistent chest pain and tachycardia after eating, dysautonomic reactions to humidity, heat, and cold, and SSRIs, which are a common family of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, caused rapid weight gain that couldn't be removed no matter how much I was exercising, dieting, etc. Also an intolerance of oral NSAIDs, which are the general ibuprofen family. Abdominal pain, blood and mucus in excrement. It's not fun. So I'm an acetaminophen girly. Yay! It's going to screw over my liver, but it means I won't have stomach ulcers. You have to take the good with the bad. With the warp thread sorted, I'm aware this is a bit of a whiplash. I'm lifting up the loom to release the warping board from the loom, gathering the warp threads into one large bundle, and using the back of my neck to drape them over and keep them tidy and out of the way, adjusting the camera as needed, while I collapse the warping board and get it tucked out of the way. I use terry cloth towels to cushion the warp threads. This helps prevent the finished weaving from being tighter at the ends and looser in the middle, creating a sort of sausage profile in the weaving. The way I warp has me cutting the warp loops at the end of winding the warp. This is what's easiest on my body. It won't work for everyone, but that's okay. This isn't a great angle, but I'm being careful to pay attention to how the warp threads are laying on the back bar of the loom, and the right hand thread goes to the smaller hole in the rigid heddle reed. It's not critical, and some minor mistakes aren't the end of the world, but it does make it easier to keep the tension of the warp threads even across the entire weaving. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you'd like to support my work, some free ways to do that are to like, subscribe, or follow, and share. This applies to other small artists as well. It's a great way to let the social media algorithms know that this is content worth watching. If you'd like to support me financially, there's a Buy Me a Coffee linked below, which acts as sort of a tip jar. I also now started the membership thing for this YouTube channel. You can go find it in my bio. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it's there now. Also, now that there's so many of you absolutely fantastic and wonderful yarn brats, I've been able to link the online Hoksong weaving shop, so feel free to check out the unique hand-woven products. This next bit is absolutely a joke, but just in case in this economy I won't say no. For $1,000 a month, you can tell me that I'm not actually disabled, I'm just lazy, and to try whatever yoga, juice cleanse, turmeric, snake oil nonsense fixed your cousin. Feel free to message me and I'll get you my payment deets. I take Cash App, Venmo, and PayPal for this nonsense. And there's the Mill River Marginalized Artists Collective that is still in the works. We are focusing on the Vending for You program, where we apply to, advertise for, and attend on behalf of other marginalized artists and ourselves. Our community resource night held at our office with food, art supplies, and clothing available on a donate as you can, free if you can't basis. Basically, we are support for marginalized artists by marginalized artists and our allies. I'm going to attach all of the links down below. If you can sign up for the Patreon at all, that would be incredibly helpful. If 80 of my currently 2,400 plus subscribers signed up for the lowest bar of $3, we'd have our monthly office rent fully covered, which would drastically decrease stress on the nonprofit leaders, i.e. me and my friends. A lot of the grants that we were counting on no longer exist, as Mermac is full of folks that the US government would rather not exist. So, joy. Attaching the warp to the bottom of apron bar is pretty easy. I finger comb it, get it separated into bits about 4 to 5 warp threads wide, separate these two bits into two, and then do a half hitch tie to the apron bar. If you have hypermobile fingers, please be very, very careful, because you can sublux dislocate your fingers during this process if you put too much pressure on your thumbs. And that leads to arthritis and buildup of pain and not being able to weave, which is the worst punishment of all. And now to the actual fun bit of weaving and getting things in order. This was a really fun scarf to weave. I really loved how the weft sort of caught the colors of the rainbow in different areas. And it was just delightful. It was just a nice ray of sunshine or ray of rainbow, depending on your perspective. I know that this is not my usual upbeat video, but it's something that I feel really, really strongly about because I don't want another child to end up like me. I am going to be in increasing amounts of lack of mobility and pain for the rest of my life, and that was preventable. That was preventable if the doctors and my parents had believed me. And because these disorders are genetic, there is such a strong sense in the community of Plato's cave. I can't keep track of the number of stories I've heard from folks who have these disorders, who have these syndromes, who learned about them, went back to their families, is like, look, this isn't normal. This isn't how life is supposed to be. We're not supposed to be in this much pain and having all of these issues. And because it's genetic and it's been normalized within these families, the older relatives or the siblings or what have you will just go, no, this is normal. Everyone's like this. This is not normal. Crying yourself to sleep is not normal. Relying on crying yourself to sleep because it makes your eyes swollen and therefore makes it more easy to make yourself go to sleep is not normal. A child spraining their ankle so badly multiple times in a row that it tears away fragments of bone is not normal. And it's preventable and it's unnecessary in this day and age. And the not funny haha, but funny dark humor thing is that these things can absolutely be tracked in family medical history if you know what you're looking for. A childhood that suggests the likelihood of developing traumagenic disorders, quote-unquote unusual food fixations that are pushed on children, intense weight fluctuation leaning towards morbidly obese. And often, if you had an older relative who was accused of doctor shopping and med-seeking behaviors, that was likely that they were trying to find an answer. As most SSRIs, antidepressants, don't work or trigger MCAS flares, I have relatives who lost their lives to that. And it's avoidable. It's avoidable if you know what you're looking at, but because it's quote unquote rare or affects neurodivergent families, which are more likely to be underemployed and under-resourced, it just gets ignored. And it cascades into so many other things. I mentioned earlier that I have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Specifically, I have hyperadrenergic postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which basically means my adrenal gland overproduces adrenaline because it's been trained to do so for unrelated/related reasons throughout my life. And that means that I get adrenaline dumps. And because of the mast cell activation syndrome, I'm allergic to my own adrenaline. It is a perpetuating cycle that is not being made easier by current politics. Hey. So much of this can be avoided. And if you know what you're looking for, it's so obvious to pattern recognition in neurodivergence. It's just, if you have children in your life who are exhibiting any of these symptoms, better safe than sorry. And if your doctor refuses to treat them because of XYZ, make sure that it's marked in their medical charts that their doctor refused care, because that at least creates a paper trail and adds pressure. I will often also suggest, and this is a horrible thing, that it has to be done, or that it's a use at all, but saying that you have an older relative who is a doctor who wants them assessed for these particular things is incredibly useful. And how I ended up getting my diagnoses is I said I had an uncle who couldn't treat me because he was out of state, but he wanted me to come in and get tested for these various things. That creates an authority figure who is keeping an eye on the situation, who is a peer to your doctor, which means that your doctor is not going to ignore things out of hand because you're low masking neurodivergent, or you're fat, or you're born assigned female at birth. All of these are factors, and it's an easy roundabout way to circumnavigate that. Let's have some hEDS Himbo as a bit of a palate cleanser and returning to lighter topics, because he's so fluffy. He's very fluffy. And yes, I do wash all of my product before it gets sold. There's always going to be a risk of cat hair, but there's not going to be a lot of cat hair. Now tying off the scarf fringes, I prefer to do 2x2 warps tied into a fringe of 4, but will do a double sliding knot of 3 if I don't have a wide enough warp. Getting the bottom sorted and tying off the other end, and this turned out so beautifully. This is such an incredible scarf. I'm so incredibly excited for this one to be sold. I think it's going to go to someone who really, really likes it. I've just got a feeling about that. And yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. And it's so soft. Oh my goodness. And hypoallergenic and machine washable, darling. That's a new feature. I'm eyeballing the length of fringe that I want and using the don't ask me how much I spent on these good shears and trimming it. The final step is between half an hour and 45 minutes of tying the fringe knots. It's not absolutely critical with a lot of acrylic yarn, but it does create a more finished, polished end look. Thank you for listening to my bit of a ramble about all of this. If you have a child in your life who is exhibiting any of these symptoms, please intervene. It can be prevented that they end up in chronic and severe pain. But thank you for coming along as I wove this scarf. I'm so glad for the odd turn that your path took that brought you here. Thank you for spending time with me at Hawksong Weaving, where we're all a bit warped, including our collagen.